was a time when you went to a company and you worked there your entire life. That was a pretty normal thing to do. My father did that. His father did that. Well, that premise is gone. I mean, that does not exist. That motivation was taken away during the 70s and 80s, and the employee was no longer the most important part of the organization. It was really about profits. What has to happen is leadership has to change the thinking from kind of those old paradigms into these new paradigms and motivate them based on what they need. And we'll get into that.
Today I'm talking with Russ Ouellette about his upcoming book.
Thank you, Michael. Very nice to spend some time with you. I have been practicing organizational development for the last 20 plus years.
Why do you think your audience needs this book?
Because I think that we're all living off premises that no longer exist. And in this book, we're going to go through this evolution. You know, human beings have been evolving over a long period of time. This evolution has it's evolved in our professional lives too. For example, there was a time when you went to a company and you worked there your entire life. That was a pretty normal thing to do. My father did that. His father did that. You know, maybe you have 2 jobs in a lifetime, right? Well, that premise is gone. I mean, that does not exist. It's been baked out of everything over the last 30 or 40 years. For example, so when I came up, it was my expectation that I was going to go to work for one company, maybe 2, and I have a whole career, and those mother companies were going to take care of me my entire life. We all know that premise is gone. And in the first part of the book, there'll be a lot of details regarding how that works, and I'll talk about it a little bit in this format. Today, my son, who's different than my father, who's different than me, will not have one job his entire life. It's his expectation that he's going to, first of all, work for a different culture of company, and he's going to have a different mindset about work, which means that our modern organizations need to really embrace shifts in culture, behavior, norms, symbols, the way they operate. And if I can give you the cleanest example, the reason why my father worked for a company his whole life is because the company wanted him to, and set it up so that he would have that motivation would be fulfilled. Well, that motivation was taken away during the 70s and 80s when downsizing and consolidation and the employee was no longer the most important part of the organization. It was really about profits. Pretty much destroyed anybody's expectation of working for a company for a long period of time. Having said that, we can go back there. But what has to happen is leadership has to change shift the thinking from kind of those old paradigms into these new paradigms, which are going to allow people what they need and motivate them based on what they need. And we'll get into that in some detail.
So do you think this evolution or revolution really has been accelerated by the pandemic? Do you think that the pandemic has caused workers to value being at an organization for a long time less and less? You know, are we talking about gig workers? Are we going to experience an explosion of gig workers? Because companies during the pandemic had showed that there is no loyalty to the employee.
Yeah. I remember being a 33-year-old professional working in finance, and there was a Fast Company was a pretty popular new magazine at the time, and Fast Company used to talk about the gig economy and the gig worker, right? That was such a new concept at the time. I mean, people have been doing it for forever, but it was bringing forth that this gig economy was becoming a thing. And about a decade ago, I gave a presentation at the Southern Hampshire University, which talked about all the changes that were happening and how things were going to change and accelerate. And it's not me. I'm not a genius here. It's pretty obvious if you look at the facts, the things that are going on, that we're evolving to a place where gig economy, if you will, or contract work or portfolio work or some other concept of work was going to take place in the future. But I thought it was going to be like, you know, in 2040 or 50. I did not. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, all our systems are based on this old system, so nothing's really changing. What's happened is the pandemic has forced companies to allow people to work from home, to trust people's productivity on their own, to delegate and expect people to be accountable for their work, right? And not only in this experiment of the pandemic was it just that clear. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of different examples. People working from home because they had to stay with their kids, people that couldn't travel, people that were sick, right? People that were working in different environments. I know people that traveled the world while they worked. I mean, they just went on a big long vacation and worked every day, and then went to Paris and Rome. I mean, so there's things that happen that. So to answer your question, which is the pandemic has accelerated this exponentially, and now what we're seeing is an embracing of these changes. And so the imperative here is that leaders at all levels and companies and organizational structures and the way we think about work has to change. The quicker people adopt these changes or this way of thinking, the more successful they're going to be in this new economy and this new reality. So yes, the pandemic has accelerated it exponentially.
Companies are always going to have workers. They're always going to have to fill jobs. But what you're saying is that there's a new way that leaders have to act and engage their employee that is going to make them successful. So a company that was once successful, if they're not embracing these new changes, they're not going to be as successful as they were, because their quality of employee is not going to be as strong, because they're not creating a supportive environment for those top performing employees.
Yeah. So I was talking with an executive just last week who runs it's a food service business, but it's not actually food service. It's not delivering the food, but it's the business of food service, right? And this person was, and I hear this all the time about every industry, just complaining about, and not complaining, she was venting. She was venting about the fact that workers are different today. They don't, people don't want to work as hard. The typical things that you hear, which is ridiculous and flat out wrong, but you hear these things constantly. And what was happening is you're seeing old world meet new world, right? So in her mind, you got up in the morning every day, you went to work, you were dedicated to that company no matter what. You worked for the money pretty much, and you worked to be able to pay your bills, and you took pride in that work, and you built strong relationships, and you were going to be there a long time. And then when she doesn't see that, her frustration is there's something wrong with the new worker. In reality, what's happened is the new worker does not want to just go to work for the money. Even though they need the money, they don't want to just work for the money. They want to have a different connection, a different relationship. The relationship might not be as loyal. The relationship might not be as dedicated. But it doesn't mean that person can't go to work and be really productive and really enjoy their work. And the secret is if we can attract them to be attracted and connected and motivated to that company, then they will stay and they will work really hard. Another example, real quick. We were the banker, and we were talking to them about organizational dynamics and trying to get people to the team to come together better. And the president of the bank said, what happened to the days when people would come to work and just be totally dedicated and work so hard all day? And now I have people that want to leave at 4:00 to go kickboxing. And my response to him was, well, good for her. She wants to go kickboxing. Why is going kickboxing a problem? Well, back in the day, we wouldn't do that. I said and my thought was back in the day, I wanted to do that, but I couldn't do it because again, these constructs were totally different. The expectation was that I would stay till 6 or 7 o'clock every night, work 6 days a week. I know people never even took their vacations, right? We were so invested in this it was this mindset when I wanted to spend time with my kids and I wanted to leave on time and I could not because it would not be accepted. We're living in a world now where that is going to be readily accepted. In fact, it's going to be readily the norm. Never in history have human beings worked as hard as they work today. And the norm was 6 hours a day. It was not normal to work more than 6 hours a day, no matter what your role was, right? Today, or over the last several decades, the expectation has been 10 hours a week. I always ask clients, I always ask people I know, how many hours a week do you work? And to to a T, they all say about 60 hours a week, right? Now, these are professional people, but 60 hours a week, and I think that's still fine. If they said, I think 50 hours is probably more reasonable. And I also think you can work 40 hours and still work in your head when you're not there. So there's different ways of thinking about work and different ways of doing it. Did I answer your question, Michael?
Yes, you did. Yeah. And being from a younger generation, I saw my parents, be loyal and dedicated to a company. They went in and they worked hard, but at the end of the day, they were disposable. When times got lean, they got cut. I've myself has experienced the same thing where I thought that I would have spent, 20 years, 30 years with the organization. But when it came down to it, I was just a number on a spreadsheet. When it was time to make cuts, I got cut. So I can relate to that because my loyalty to organization moving forward will be questioned.
What did your father do for work, Michael?
When I was a kid, my dad worked in a factory.
And how long did he work in that factory?
20 years, maybe 15 years.
Yeah. So it was a long time, right? And that was because your father, being a little older before these changes started happening, it was expected and a norm that you would go to work for that period of time, and you would be dedicated, and that company would take care of you. And the company did take care of him. He gave him probably a pension, right? They probably had other benefits, right? He got a gold watch when he retired, but I mean that's what they did. But it was still all this other value that was there, right? Again, in the 70s and 80s, that was taken away, and the spreadsheet and the margins and the stock price became more important than the employee. When I worked at Raytheon back in the 80s, and I was responsible for manpower. So I was the one guy making the spreadsheets, trying to figure out how much manpower we needed for the next 2 quarters, right? And it was nothing to say, we're going to have a layoff, right? And by the way, I'm not faulting them for that. That was good practice at the time, but it was too cavalier. It was too easy. Well, we'll get rid of them now. We'll pick them up when we need them in a year when we get that next big contract. And it was this flow of people in and out. And really, while I was there, I didn't get a sense that they really cared about me. Well, my father and my uncle both worked at Raytheon at one time, and they had a different experience than I had. And here's another example. Why did I go to Raytheon? I went to Raytheon because my father and my uncle were there. It was in the family. That's how dedicated and committed Raytheon was to the family. And I can't validate this, but I remember, I think it was actually a consideration that if you were related, they would rather hire for that than what school you went to. I mean, it was important that they took care of the family. That all went away. And it went away across manufacturing, right? So yeah, so what you're experiencing, Michael, what you experience is exactly what I would expected you would experience, right? And so when a 27-year-old is thinking about working in a factory, they have no expectation that they're going to be there the whole life or that they're going to be that committed to it, right? And maybe it's time that shift takes place. And the question is, what it then becomes the motivation for them to be successful and to be engaged and be accountable and be productive? What is then the motivation? And that's what we're going to talk about.
That motivation, from what I understand about the work that you've done and some of your thoughts, is that motivation starts with the leadership of the organization, creating an environment. While we're not maybe giving out gold watches or we're not giving out pensions the way that we did a long time ago, but it's the expectation that the leadership makes working at that place more valuable than just a paycheck. Those people who are coming in those entry-level jobs, they need to feel valued beyond just what goes into their bank with their direct deposit.
Yeah. So I think for the most part, you're right. And I think for most professional workers, meaning the people that have particular intellectual skills that are applying to the company, whether it be procurement or human resources or engineering or, technical skills or actually anybody that has any training in a particular field, whether it's electricity or, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But there are people that regardless of what you give them for benefits or bonuses or connecting them to the company, that still are motivated by other things. We'll get into that, but basically, there's no one size fits all. So if you're a manufacturing plant that's providing jobs to people who have, they don't have a background and it's new to them and they're on a line and they're not doing, those people have different needs than the new engineer that you hired. The motivations and the needs are going to be different. So you have to you establish a culture around what exactly those needs are. But generally, you can also say that regardless of their background, people want more than just a paycheck, and people want to be self-actualized, right? They want more out of life than just that. So your premise is correct. I'm just trying to qualify it there. Your premise is correct that, and it's not just about being nice. And it's, that's the myth here. It's not like you just have to be nice and have ice cream socials, and that's not what this is about. What is it that they need, and what can we give them? And of course, Buckingham's work, I think of the 90s, where all the engagement work came out of, right, was prove that, it's how you manage people is not the same. It's different for every individual, right? So that's kind of the mindset that people have to kind of think about. And the leaders so it starts at the top. It's the leaders that have to kind of embrace this, and it's going to be the managers that have to kind of execute it, and the workers have to, execute that as well. The challenge and the shortfall, the problems that are going to affect this transition that should take place is going to be twofold. It's going to be the people that are responsible for the profits, right? And that might be the board of directors, that might be investors. Those people, their incentives are different, right, than probably the culture of the organization. Not that they are, but they could be different. They should be aligned. So the pivot point there is the executives, is the leaders of those firms. Those leaders need to bridge both what the employees need and what the market needs, so that they all can be sustainable. Not just grow for growth sake and profitable, but to be sustainable.
So the question is, Russ, how do you help those leaders bridge that gap? How do you provide them the tools or resources to make the kind of impact that you're talking about?
Well, I need to get them to believe and understand, right? They need to understand the changes that are coming swiftly and fast, and move away from why don't they work hard to what am I going to do to really leverage the strength of these outstanding people and get them to stay in my company and really add value. Some people are doing this right now. There's some great companies out there that are doing this right now. They're doing it intuitively. They like you. They've embraced the fact that this stuff's important. They need to do it. But there's a lot of companies that are still not necessarily thinking that way. And I think generational changes, shifts in leadership, will, as the 30-year-old becomes the senior executive, right? I think that the new world order, if you will, or the new way of thinking about this stuff will change. But between now and then, we need to be productive as a society. We need to still, there's great opportunities in front of us. We still need, but the key opportunity is we need people to be happy, and we need people to not be so stressed, and we need people to be fulfilled, which is when they're going to create the most amount of productivity and great cultures and happiness. How we do that is through communicating some of these ideas, providing thought tools and exercises that they can use in real time to really kind of embrace these things. There's peer groups, there's advisory groups, boards of directors should be populated with diverse people, not just the typical diversity, but also diversity of rank, and background. I don't want to fall short of saying they also should embrace coaching, and they should embrace really, use their professionals, their organizational development professionals, and let them loose and give them the latitude that they need to make these changes in the company.
So when it comes to coaching, how do people know, or how do you know when you're working with someone who says they're open to coaching, but actually isn't? Do they give you some sort of vibe? Is there something they say? Are you noticing behaviors that aren't changing? How do
It
you
doesn't
know?
happen, Michael. The people that engage in these ideas and that engage in organizational development and coaching and thinking through and inclusion and engagement and empowerment and self-actualization and all these things, those people and the people that basically hire firms like mine are already there. They're trying to perfect it. They're trying to execute on it. We don't really, people that are blocked to this they don't hire us, which is part of the problem. And not because I need them to hire us. I want them to be enlightened. I need them to understand what these things are, and I think so these books that are coming out will help both the practitioner or the worker, the employee, the human being. It'll help the middle manager understand how to maneuver and how to deal with conflict and how to motivate people and how to build confidence, and they'll learn all those things. And the leader that'll learn to create sustainable businesses, sustainable cultures, and operations that are going to not just grow financially, but also grow fantastic cultures where people will be totally attracted to.
And now I know culture is a big part for you. So can you talk a little bit about culture, not just really the buzzword of culture, but what it means to build a strong organizational culture that fills the need that you're talking about?
It is my primary belief. And the premise of all of this, the value of all of this, is that we as workers and leaders need to understand culture. Organizational culture. People understand it, they embrace it, they understand they're attracted to it. But the question is what does it really mean, and what do you really do about it? So culture is really an important concept. And I'm just going to tell you a quick story. You've had a meeting with somebody where you've gone to their office and you sit down in their office, or even someone maybe at your work, or somewhere in a professional setting. You go to a meeting and the meeting feels great, it goes fine, but you leave and you have a bad sense. You're not sure. You don't trust, or there's something that's just not, lining up right in your brain. You don't know exactly what it is, but your intuition is telling you that something's wrong, or something's different, or something's not aligned. That is what you're feeling is your culture. You're feeling their culture. You're feeling the values of that organization, their norms, behaviors, symbols. You're feeling those things that somehow is giving you a vibe, right? That allows you to act. We all understand this. This is something that's real. So when we think about, there's a book by Yuval Noah Harari called *Sapien*, which maybe some of you have read. It's a fantastic book. It takes you from the beginning of human history till to today, and talks about our nature, human nature, how we evolved, and how do we organize ourselves, and how do we think, and how do we behave, and the kind of the premise is pretty much with most of that that body of work is that human beings are basically 3 meals away from total chaos, right? Like we are animals through and through, and that we will we kind of have this nature, and that nature is what it is. There's a new book out by David Grober and David Wingrow called *Dawn of Everything*, which is the same kind of book. It's talking about history, but almost talking about it more in just societies. And it's got a different view. It basically says that human beings are basically good. We're good. Our nature is good, right? Which I've always believed. I always believed that we're born knowing what is right. Children know what's not wrong. And even as adults, we know what's not right, and we know what's wrong. Like we know the difference between those things. We know the difference between being fair and not fair. It's almost like innate in our biology. So their argument is we're not just animals, and so on and so forth. What's important about that is both of these authors, or all of these authors, talk about our nature. So we have a human nature, and the human nature, it's almost like written in our DNA what kind of things we're gonna do, and how we're gonna think about things, and what are we gonna be afraid of, and what are we gonna be excited about, and what do we want, and those things are kind of innate, right? there's also this, so that nature might inform our behavior. Okay, so let's just look at it that way. So from the bottom you have human nature, and the next level you have behavior, the behavior of our nature, right? Now, if you look at this from a higher level, or from a more of a macro level, right? We live in a climate, and the climate is the environmental things that are affecting us, right? So the environmental things are those things that, what do we eat? How do we, what are the resources that we have? Where do we live? I mean, all these things have an impact, right? How are our families contrived? All this other stuff. And so between this climate, which is the high environmental stuff, and this lower behavior and nature stuff, there's something in the middle, which is the thing that controls all, which is the thing that pivots between the climate and the behavior, and that is culture. You could say we have human beings. We have human beings that work in a company, and they have a nature. They want to eat. They want to have good family life. They want to go to church. Whatever that stuff is, they're driven by these kind of internal things that they want to do. They also have personalities, and personalities can be different, right? But even though they have different personalities, it really might affect their behavior. But the nature and the personality kind of creates some general foundation of behavior, right? And I believe generally they're good, right? Now you're working let's say you're working in an environment like, you're working in healthcare, right? You're working in healthcare. The environment of healthcare is the system's really not doing that well. We don't necessarily have the best healthcare system that works for all of us in a good way, right? And this isn't a criticism of any of that. I'm just saying it's not optimal, right? We can agree to that, right? That's kind of the environment. That's kind of the climate. Healthcare is within a climate, which is institutions that control it, insurance companies, practitioners, all that stuff, right? So between that healthcare climate and the behaviors of these really good people with natures is the culture. Now, if you walk into a healthcare organization that doesn't have a good culture, you know it. You have attrition, you have serious problems, right? You walk into a healthcare organization that has a great culture, right? And I can show you, so I can share several examples of that, really great cultures where people are committed, they're treated fairly, they have to work within the parameters of healthcare, they have to follow the rules and the laws and do everything they're supposed to do, right? But there's something magic that's going on with the culture where it engages people, the behavior is brought out, and it becomes really profound and really valuable, right? And there's lots of examples like that. So just the way to think about this is culture is the pivot point between climate and environment and behavior and human nature. So if a company wants to be successful, it really can't tinker with the environment. It can't change the industry laws. You can't change banking necessarily. Banking is banking, right? You can't change banking. You can't change the law. That's going to be there, right? And you have lawyers that you have these professional bankers and accountants and lawyers that go to school to learn those skills, and they're good people, and they have personalities, and they have a nature, and they want to be productive, and they want to learn. And then they go to a firm that either meets that need, right, and pivots between those two things in a productive way, or doesn't pivot in a productive way. We all have examples of that. If you've had a job where it was this wasn't matching with you, right, or you didn't feel like you fit into that particular culture, right, you would feel it. If you worked in a company or a group and you really felt part of the team and you felt whatever those things are, it was fulfilling for you, right, it would be more of a successful organization. The point is that culture is the key thing, and what we have to realize is that the dynamics here are changing. So the environmental considerations of the climates are changing all around us, and I can go through that in some detail. And now when our nature's not changing, but our behaviors and norms are shifting, right? Our motivations are changing. The things that fulfill us, our values are shifting, and they're shifting to being more fulfilled, right? So what has to happen is the leadership and the culture of those organizations need to meet those motivations.
That was really great.
I'm gonna keep going. I gotta keep going. Can I keep going?
You can keep going. I'm just telling you that the point that you made about the layers and then the human nature and then that culture in between is probably one of the most relatable ways that I've never considered culture in that perspective. And I think it's a really genius way to look at it. I've been thinking about that story you told about your dad and you. I think is a really great way for us to open the book with the story. The changes between your dad, you, and my generation are what this whole book is about. How things have changed from the time that your dad, who was probably born in the 30s or 40s.
He was born in 1938.
Yeah. And then with you being born in
1960.
Yeah, 90. So you're my dad's age. So
and my son was born in 1994.
I was like, okay, so Liam's not older than me.
No,
I was born
1994.
in
but there's those 30-year differences are huge.
Right.
Right.
Right. And they're tremendous. And, this is a little off topic and Liam can cut this, but I think about what it's like raising my son he's 7 months old today. What I have available to make his life better compared to what my parents had when I was 7 months old to make my life better. Like the options and the things that are available, we have more tools and resources for workers in this generation. Like your dad's generation, mental health wasn't like that wasn't a thing. Like people struggled with those things, but we didn't talk about them. And now there's such a focus on mental health and the whole well-being of a person as an employee. Like that culture change. And I think that's why that story is important. Long story short, getting to the fact that the way things were done in the 50s and how they changed into the 70s and what it means today. Like, I think that's a really great story to start talking about.
So I just want to get a little foundation in why this is important. Like, there are several things that are going on. So 10 years ago, when I gave that talk at Southern Hampshire University, and I outlined some of these changes. At the time when before the pandemic, these things are coming. And again, I don't say that because I'm smarter. I'm just saying, look at what's going on. You can kind of tell that things are shifting, right? So these are the things. We've reached a productivity peak. People can only work so hard. I cannot read any more emails than I read today. In fact, I have an algorithm that sorts out emails that really are junk, and I can only kind of look at certain things. But even with that, if you're working in a corporation, you are inundated with 50 to 100 emails a day. You cannot read anymore. So this human machine is not going to be able to, capture any more data than it's currently taking. There's got to be new ways of capturing and processing that data. So productivity has changed, which means that we have to figure out new ways of doing stuff. And it's not going to be by just shoving additional procedures, additional responsibilities. That's not going to happen. Our economies are changing, right? So the global economy is totally different. If we think about what's going on in the world today, back in the 30s and 40s during the Second World War, we couldn't just cut off banking and have the war end, right? Or put pressure on it. Today, bad actors in the world can get cut off by the rest of the world, and there's no economy anymore. We're all intimately connected to each other, which means that which just means that we have to kind of play a bigger game. It's more than just our hometown, our region, or our country, right? There's probably very few things that you own that haven't been influenced by some place in the world. So this is having an impact, which means that there's got to be better ways of reaching and communicating across these barriers. Our communities have shifted, right? So it used to be that, and it still is. I mean, we go to church and we belong to the fly fishing club, and, we belong to the historical society, and we certainly have that community stuff that we're doing, right? But our communities have also been extremely extended by what we consume. So on my phone, right, I listen to Sam Harris, who's a podcaster who talks so Sam Harris is reaching all kinds of people, right? I listen, I can get newspaper podcasts, I can get newspaper articles. I mean, it's delivered to my phone every single day. The world is kind of right in front of me. And also the people I interact with are different. I'm on community groups, think groups, peer groups that are all over the country and even in different countries. They're not all right here in my community. So our reach is totally different, which gives companies access to people, right? And gives workers access to more people, right? And then put in there the fact that people have worked from home now. I mean, that could be a problem for you, or it could be an advantage for you. 1 in 67 jobs was a hybrid job before the pandemic, and now it's 1 in 7 jobs. And there is research that says that yes, some of those jobs will go back to the workplace, and people want to go back to the workplace. Not everybody can do this, but it's still going to be with us for a long time. So these changes are going to happen. Technology and social tools. So social media is bad. I'm on Facebook. I don't participate in any politics. I show pictures of my family, and it's a way of connecting with my family and also connecting with colleagues about our families. So technology is creating the social tools that my social world is different. There was a book called Bowling Alone by Putnam, and he wrote how our communities were going from the bowling alley to the workforce. Right. At one time, we went bowling with our friends. Now our friends are at work. Right. Well, today, our friends are not necessarily in the office. Our friends are everywhere. They're all over the place. We have access to friends, relationships, communities, and resources that we never had before. Professional. I mean, how many people? There's so many people that have college degrees now, or have extended training, whatever field they are, technical training, whatever that is. And there's an acknowledgement and a need for continuous learning. People want to learn and consume information, right? Those systems are changing, right? So not only are people expecting to go to work and work, like my father used to go work a job, and he was happy to work the job for 30 years and do the same thing, or maybe get promoted, but it wasn't anything different. Today a young engineer goes to work. He or she might know code, but then they're going off and they're doing other things, and they're learning new things, and they might even get an MBA, and then they're gonna pursue their passion a little bit more. They're gonna continuously learn things, and that's kind of the need of a lot of people, a lot of what the expectation is. So generational shifts. Now we talked a little bit about it earlier, but I have to tell you, when I get really annoyed when people start, we can't say someone's old. That would be not cool to, I'm an older person, and I would be insulted if someone said, well, Russ, you're an older person, right? You're different than me, and you can't say that. But we can say that millennials Gen Xers are lazy and don't want to work hard. I mean, that's just what I hear all the time. And it's like so not true, right? The generational changes are real, but not real because, they're real because of that culture thing. The environment's changed, right? The nature has not changed. The environment's changed, and the culture in between there has changed. And some of these things I'm talking about have shifted people's thinking, right? The young girl that wanted to leave the bank at 4 o'clock to go kickboxing, this person is not lazy. She's not. She's got all the same values that I have. She wants to do a good job, but she also has boundaries around what it is, because she's done the calculus in her head about the return on investment for that. And she also realizes that her health is important, right? And that her social well-being is important, and her mental health is important. So kickboxing becomes the foundation of who she is. And, a baby boomer might not see that, but that's kind of the wrong. We have to open our eyes and say, people need to get what they need. It doesn't mean we give it to them. It just means that, these are realities we have to accept. She's not lazy. Her values are strong in these other areas. So what you might want to do is create a kickboxing team for the bank and invite other people to do it with them, right? That might be a better approach than just, giving her a hard time about not kickboxing. Information and freedom of access to all kinds of information. So Michael, you and I have we've gone to school a lot. We've got, we have access to databases that a lot of people don't necessarily have, right? Because of our universities that we attended. And and that we still teach at and we have access to, right? But those same things are available on the internet in some form or another, right? It was a time my father couldn't go start a business and go learn everything he could to want to learn about a particular engineering element unless he went to college and did that specifically. Today, people are going and educating themselves online, which means they can then go start a business. They can go do certain things, right? If you're a worker in a company, look at the acts. I mean, how many times have you asked Siri to go look up something or Googled yourself? During this meeting with you, Michael, I went and looked up the author of one of the books that I'm involved in. I wanted to look at that, right? And I got access to it, right? I found out about it through those channels, right? And then I engaged in it. So information is all over the place, which basically flattens the playing field, right? A company does not own that resource, and it's all about transparency and exchange and open system, open architecture. And, I think Google's trying to put every book online. I mean, this is continually to be a reality, which then flattens the playing field for all kinds of people. The desire to be fulfilled is a critical point of today's society. Now this isn't for every society, but in our society, there's an expectation that we're going to do. We're going to do better. We all have cell phones. We all see the world. We all have expectations about what we want for our lives. People are going into deep exploration about what they want. COVID has demonstrated that. How many people do you know have maybe changed their lives during this COVID experience, or thought about what they do, which is part of the great resignation, really, right? People are leaving and changing because they've realized, oh, wow, I might not be as happy or fulfilled as I thought I was, when they take a minute to think about it, right? People want to be fulfilled. And it doesn't matter who you are, you want fulfillment, whatever that fulfillment is. And all of these things that I'm talking about have created the conditions or the environment where they can be fulfilled to some degree. Or again, it's the pursuit of happiness, not necessarily getting happiness, right? They can pursue their happiness and they pursue it more deliberately. Self-branding. People are, TikTok is a great example of people creating these little brands and, getting, 100,000 followers and 1 million views on something. And, it's like people are identifying, and creating their own identifications around this stuff, which means that they, it's not just put your head down and work. It's also like this whole other dynamic that we have. So people want to be branded, and people want to, proud of themselves and kind of have an idea about themselves, and they get in touch with themselves. So, and the other thing that's important is that we have some, I think what's interesting is that we have actually some prototypes of tools that exist right now that are giving us a hint into the future. So when I read that Fast Company article on the gig economy back in the day and thought, well, that's really interesting. I remember there was people used to talk about communities of practice. We saw, we saw some people, we saw the beginning of like entrepreneurial ventures. We saw people, Silicon Valley was kind of coming up, and, things were starting to really kind of bubble up, and entrepreneurism became a really big thing. And so the gig economy was kind of an outgrowth of that. And I'll talk a little bit later about portfolio and how to think about where we're going in general, but there are prototypes. So I used to think, well, how is that possible? I mean, so if I want to be a gig worker, in other words, maybe get 5 contracts and go work for, instead of one company like Raytheon, why don't I go work for 5 companies and I can sell my time that way, right? And, manage what I want to do, right? There was no really way of doing that. I would have to, be years of running around trying to meet people and trying to, and building the credentials I needed to do it. And back then credentials had to be, like from an institution. Today, it's not necessarily the case. You can build credentials through experience and work experience and working at different companies, right? But back then it was really more formal, and there was no real way of doing it. And to me, it was like, well, and communities of practice is a great idea, but where do I go and practice? Like, will we all drive to a restaurant? Like, it wasn't necessarily the same, right? So we see a tool right now, which is fundamentally kind of a prototype of what it might look like in the future. And that is LinkedIn. LinkedIn has your picture, your bio, tells people where you work, what kind of club, what kind of interesting things that you've done. I think it used to have books you've read. I don't know if it has that anymore. Your work experience, you got testimonials from people. And so people can look at that and kind of get a sense of who you are professionally. Okay. But I don't know how real a lot of that stuff is. A lot of that's kind of still posturing, right? So people are using LinkedIn as a very powerful hiring tool, recruiting tool. They're using it that way, which is good. But I wonder how different it is from just a resume, which is really just a bunch of, everybody's resume is kind of like a exaggeration or a best light of this situation. And we don't really know when we interview somebody based on a resume, and we talk to them and they interview well, but we really don't know, right? So, but that is an example of how the gig economy is accelerated, right? Because now, if I have a good LinkedIn profile and maybe even a homepage, people can kind of go to that and see more about my portfolio and things that I've done and so on and so forth. But I don't know how trustworthy it is. In the future, right? So that's a prototype of what's going to happen. In the future, those tools will be very reliable. So much so that I can imagine a time when the gig economy is everything. Now, I don't want to scare people too much here, but in the future, I don't know when that's going to be, we're starting to see trends of that now, that the gig economy is really hitting ground. A lot more people are starting businesses because of all these things I just talked about. They're allowing them to do that. They can do multiple things at a time. They can write a book. They can, teach at a college. They can do extended research. They can have 3 clients on the side that they're consulting with, right? No, if you're an accountant, you can have 5 key clients and just work and have your own little business doing that. There's all kinds of different opportunities for that to happen. In the future, you won't even have to go off and find those because the data will be so reliable that you will be able to look at that data and that person would have a brand and you would have reputation that, imagine, Michael, you're going to go to your computer someday, right? And you're going to say, geez, I'm looking for a new experience. I'm not looking for a new job. I'm looking for a new experience. I would like to do more work in aerospace, let's say, right? So you'll go into this database, whatever it is, this platform, whatever it is, and you'll write in there, you'll put in there, here's my portfolio, this is all my experiences. You'll have ratings and scores just like you would a book, right? 5 stars, 4.5 stars, 300 people scored you. Pretty reliable, right? And it might not be exactly like that, but there'll be some kind of reliable system, right? And then you'll go to your computer, you'll put in, I want to work in aerospace. I'd like to work with this kind of technology. I'd like to do this kind of stuff. And what's going to come back is three offers, not 3 interviews. What'll come back is there's 3 assignments, Michael, that we have for you. What you'll say is, okay, you know what? I really want to be in San Diego. Let me take that one in San Diego and I can work remotely and I can travel back. Oh, that fits me. I'm going to take that. And you're going to type back and say, you're going to have enough information for that to say, yes, I want to do that. Now, why you're going to be able to do that is because the culture will be so good in these operations that it's not going to be, you're going to have understood what that culture is before you even take the job, right? And because you're in a certain environment or industry or whatever it is, there's going to be a standard culture that's part of that. And we won't have to work for bad bosses, because if they're bad bosses, they'll get bad scores and no one will go work for them. You see what I'm saying? It's like there'll be the self-selection process of how we hire people. Now, how do we do it today? We do exactly like we used to do in 1950. We collect a bunch of resumes. We have a human being look at them. Maybe a computer system sorts through it. We look at them and we say, these 3 people, let's sign up these 3 people and bring them in for an interview. They come in for an interview. That's not a perfect process. You hire somebody and it turns out, well, they were okay. They're not really what they're not really what they represented themselves to be. And so that old system of just collecting the resumes and going through the interview process and everything else, we do that better today. We just do it faster and in a bigger way. You still have to go for an interview, but now instead the HR person gets to look through 200 resumes. And then after those 200 resumes, they get to score them and break them down again. And they get it down to 4 people and then they phone screen them and then they bring them in. And it's the same process. It's just they use technology for that process. But in the future, these processes will change completely. They won't be the same process. And we as leaders have to think differently about that. We have to think in terms of not just making the process we have faster and better with more volume. We have to make the process different.
I mean, I'm in, man. I've been in like a trance just listening to you to go on about it. It's incredible.
Sorry to go on about it. I do get excited about it.